Welcome to the Grow Down on Soil Health. I'm your host, Dr. Ben West, Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health, and today I'm sitting down with Hans Schmitz, a sixth-generation farmer from Indiana and a technical advisor with Farmers for Soil Health. Welcome to the podcast, Hans.
What the gladsome tidings be, Ben? Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming in with so much energy. I know you must be coming in like that because of your movie watching experience over the weekend.
Yeah. I actually went to church on Sunday, and Hark the Herald Angels Sing, I believe, have that exact phrase in the song.
Okay.
And I thought, why not just co-opt that and make that a welcome?
I love it. Well, so Hans, maybe we should get to work here.
Maybe.
Yeah. So you're a technical advisor with Farmers for Soil Health and a technical assistant specialist with the Indiana Ag Nutrient Alliance. You've been involved with the Tri-Societies for the last 20 years, and you're a certified crops advisor. Obviously, farming's been part of your story, all the way back to your birth, your entire life, part of a sixth-generation farm. Tell us a little bit about your history in agriculture. How did you, what was your experience as a young person, and how did you parlay that into a professional, career?
Sure. So I grew up on an operational dairy farm, which anybody who knows dairy farms, that pretty much defines a youth. The cows came first. Dad milked twice a day at 5 a.m., 5 p.m. Around about the age of 4, I had some older cousins, and I got my first sawed-off pitchfork and started shoveling straw and everything on farm. I got my first paid job on farm at the age of 8 or 9, sweeping out the shop floor for a quarter a sweep. And I used the money from that to buy my first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pizza thrower.
Oh, wow. Who was your favorite?
At that time, it was Michelangelo.
Wow.
All little boys, very active.
Nice. I was a Donatello.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. So, yeah, as I got into teenage years, the house I grew up in was built in 1858 by the first generation. So house that old had its personality to it. And as I got into teenage years, we used farming as a way to punish, I suppose. So if I messed up, I had to go out and help milk cows, kind of thing. And that doesn't lend itself really well to coming back to the farm immediately. So I did go to Purdue for agronomy, agricultural meteorology, got a bachelor's and master's there, hung out in the Purdue Extension realm for a while before working my way back onto the farm starting around 2017 with doing some of the financials. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, I've taken a larger role on the family farm.
Yeah. So tell me about the operation now.
So we sold the cows in 2011 after a straight line wind event took out some of our infrastructure. And then today we are corn, soybean. We still do a little bit of winter wheat, but mostly wheat as a cover crop. This year we've got 25% of our acres in cover crop and minimum tillage. We do have about 11 head of beef cattle because you never completely get rid of all the cows,
Yeah, you have to have enough there to be a nuisance.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. That's beef cattle farming in general. Where I live, there's been a huge drop in number of cattle herds the last 10 years because the old folks are retiring and the young kids have no interest in that lifestyle. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens to beef cattle production the next 10 or 20 years, particularly in areas that aren't major beef cattle producing areas like West Tennessee, where I live. I don't think there's going to be many cows on the landscape in the future in those areas.
It's an interesting conundrum, especially with the pricing being what it is. A lot of herds are just getting out because there's money to be made by selling.
That's it. That's right. And it's expensive to get back in the game.
Extremely, yeah.
But you also grew hops on your farm.
I did. So my father was an old hippie, and one of his biggest regrets is that he didn't make it to the Lake Erie Soda Pop Festival, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's one of two things that makes Posey County, puts it on the map. It's also referred to as Bull Island, the festival at Bull Island. And it is similar to what Woodstock 99 would be for Gen X, or the Fire Festival would be for millennials. Spectacular failure, but Cheech and Chong actually performed at one point.
Oh, wow.
He didn't make it to that, but he was always interested in like that kind of rebellion mindset, maybe setting up a still and doing some shine. He never did. But
no judgment.
When he heard that I was brewing a little home brew on the side with a buddy of mine, he decided, let's go in 50-50. Let's grow some hops. You can use it for your home brew. We can see what kind of market, how it grows around here. So we grabbed an old swing set that was completely non-functional outside of the structure itself, put that in the middle of the yard, got some...
that was your trellis system.
Yes. So we got some stakes to put in the ground that we could put baling twine through the loops in the swing set, and that was most of the trellis. We had 5 or 6 different strings of baling twine. We had 4 hops plants, and you wouldn't think 4 hops plants would produce that many hops. But by the second year, we didn't actually tear them down and put them through any kind of processing. We just hand-picked hops, and you could get about 4 different harvests per year.
Oh, wow.
Off these hop plants. And we were something like 5 gallons of hops per year we were making. And when you're home brewing, a single batch of home brew in a 10-gallon container takes less than a quart of hops. So if you need any Cascade hops today, I've still got a freezer full.
Wow. So you grew your own hops and made your own beer out of the hops you grew.
Correct. Yeah.
That's farm to table.
Now, one of the interesting things about hops is you've got to find a way to dry them afterwards so that they will freeze and keep when they're frozen. So what I did was handpick the hops. I found an old shopping cart that happened to be somewhere on the farm, put a bed sheet in the bottom and the top, turned a box fan onto the hops for about 3 days, and that dried them down enough to where I'm still pretty sure today that you could make some beer out of it.
So were they pretty easy to grow?
Yeah. The publications I was reading were talking about how they were nitrogen intensive in fertility. And maybe on a commercial scale that's true, but in the backyard, not at all. Outside of the first year, never added any additional fertility. They were supposed to get powdery mildew out the wazoo because we're in a humid climate. And I did experience that, but not enough to really affect production.
I know a lot of nerdy people, and some of them make beer. And I'm surprised that none of them that I know of have tried to grow hops in their backyard. It seems like a perfect tag on to a hobby.
It's easier than you think. Yeah.
Well, everybody listening, start Googling hot growing hops, and I want all the recipes sent into the podcast of all the beer that's going to be made as a result of this. But we've been messing around long enough, Hans. Yeah. So let's talk. I'm really curious about one of your degrees. You said you got a degree in agricultural meteorology?
Correct, yeah.
Tell me about that. I have no idea what that degree is, and how has that, related to your career as a crop advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. So, admittedly, when I started out working towards that degree, I didn't know what all that entailed exactly. But what it comes down to is I've heard Dr. Fred Below out of the University of Illinois mention that 70% of a crop's yield is weather dependent in dryland agriculture. And that seems about right. So the agricultural meteorology is looking at the weather's effect on crops, whether that be its effect on yield or root growth and development, or damage from hail, winds, green snap, or even disease pressure and disease development with, in my neck of the woods, southern rust being one of the biggest corn diseases, and that coming up out of the south being carried on the weather, on the winds.
Wow. And of course now, with the changing climate, farmers every year are having to deal with weather issues maybe they have not in the past. How much are your farmers that you work with concerned about that? And how are they managing, production in a changing climate?
Well, so in the state of Indiana, at least, we see wetter springs, which means we've got to work around shorter windows for planting. We've certainly seen planting, the season itself extend earlier and earlier into potentially even the month of March, in order to hit those windows to get everything planted in a timely fashion. And then you get into the summer and autumn where, at least in Indiana, we tend to see slightly drier conditions. The odds of us turning into a dot on the drought monitor increase. And so we've got to find ways to adjust to a lot of moisture in the spring and still get enough root development and soil conditioning to be able to hold on to the moisture going into the summer and the fall.
Gotcha. And what role do you see in your work are regenerative farming practices playing in helping farmers mitigate, those issues?
Yeah.
Cover crops, especially.
Well, certainly. So, cover crops providing number one, soil armor. So if you look at, and as a meteorologist, I love to use this term, the terminal velocity of a raindrop.
I love that as well. I learned about that in my soil science classes as well.
Well, good.
And I remember learning that. I'm like, man, whoever knew I would be learning about the terminal velocity of a raindrop, majoring in wildlife biology. But yeah.
So
it's awesome.
So you get to this terminal velocity, which is relatively fast, and it's going to hit a soil particle if there's not soil armor or cover crop out there. And for the most part, it can break apart those particles or combine with those particles and create a runoff situation. My family farm is completely highly erodible land. So for us, preventing erosion is one of the number one things that we want to do. And having an armor, having a cover crop, having a high residue situation is preventing gullies from forming and reducing the amount of work that we have to do to prepare the field bed in the spring, among many other things that we could talk about.
Yeah, and what about what benefits do you see with your farmers using cover crops with the opposite side of the end of the spectrum during times of drought? I know a lot of farmers talk about the water holding capacity increase that cover crops bring them. Do you see that much in your part of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So having the cover crop there is going to increase the aggregate stability of the soil. It's going to increase the fungal and biological activity of the soil. And it's going to create a situation where the soil can physically hold on to water for a longer period of time. Keeping in mind that we really want to hold on to the moisture until we get canopy closure for our cash crop. If we can achieve canopy closure on the cash crop, we've got the shade to then hold on to whatever might fall later on in the season a little bit better, just like we had at cover crop.
Yeah, so lots of benefits with changing weather, but also in nutrient management, I know, which is something a lot of your farmers are concerned about. Talk about that. How are you using cover crops as a tool in farmers' nutrient management plans?
Absolutely. So working for the Indiana Ag Nutrient Alliance has given me a lot of opportunity to delve deeper into 4R nutrient management, the right source, the right rate, the right time, the right place. And particularly this year, where if you look at the price sheets for some of our nutrients, despite having depressed crop prices, the nutrient price sheets are still increasing. And so we've got to have conversations with farmers about what do we soil sample? Do we have the data on our soils to know what nutrients are there to make intelligent decisions about can we potentially save some money by reducing the amount of nutrients we're applying? Now, with cover crops, we know from the Midwest Cover Crop Council and other tools that cover crops can be a scavenger of nutrients. So let's grab them, hold on to them, and then release them as they break down after they die. Or with the legumes in particular, they can be a producer of nutrients like nitrogen. So when we're looking at those not formal nutrient management plans, but nutrient management activities, wherein we are using cover crops, we need to consider what benefits those are going to give to us to allow us to save money on any synthetic nutrients that we might be wanting to apply.
And obviously with the farm economy right now, farmers are looking for opportunities to save every dime.
Correct. Yeah. And there are still some programs out there that will help offset the cost of the cover crops, or some programs in some states that will reduce the crop insurance premium if you are planting cover crops. So it behooves a producer, when they are incorporating cover crops, to also look at the programs that might incentivize them, and maybe potentially offset some of the additional nutrients they would need to apply.
Yeah, awesome. So talking about nutrient management, as we know, nutrient stratification can be an issue in no-till systems, and cover crops can play a role there in helping to mitigate that as well. Talk about that a little bit and how that plays out in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was first brought to our attention 3 or 4 years ago that nutrients do stratify in a no-till situation, particularly as nutrients are applied to the surface or top 2 inches or so of the soil. Cover crops, the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, states that the use of cover crops in no-till systems can help address some of that stratification. A producer in my neck of the woods did share with me some soil sampling information where they took cores and broke them apart inch by inch by inch in a long-term cover crop no-till situation and a conventional situation. And that producer was relaying that even with cover crops, there is still stratification occurring. However, the stratification occurred in both systems. So when we talk about stratification, there's just different levels of nutrients at different depths in the soil profile. Yeah. So basically, if you look at a conventional soil test, you're going to get phosphorus levels, potassium levels, and pH. And they're different 2 inches down versus 6 inches down. Correct. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Much less P and K, and a change in pH as well, from a more favorable situation in that 6 to 7 range, close to the surface, getting in his soil more acidic as you go down in the profile. But it happened in both systems. So even in a tillage system, the tillage itself mixes everything up when it occurs. The depth of the plow or the disc. Yes, yeah. But the re-stratification occurs in a relatively quick time frame. I haven't had a chance to go through in depth those results or replicate it, but initial results seem to be that, much like you wouldn't want to do a slake test on aggregate stability for late season conventional versus no-till, you also wouldn't want to test stratification after you've had 2 or 3 months after the tillage pass. Gotcha. And cover crops are helping to manage that by moving nutrients through the soil profile. To some degree, I don't know that we have the research to know to the full extent of that. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Before we keep digging in, farmers should hear about Farmers for Soil Health. It's a program established by farmers for farmers, dedicated to improving soil health practices such as planting cover crops to enhance the environment and profitability of farmers. Through this podcast, which is in partnership with the Soy Checkoff, Port Checkoff, and the National Corn Growers Association, we dig deep into sustainable farming practices. We're bringing you tangible, experience-based, and research-backed information that can help you enhance your land and your bottom line. If you're enjoying it this far, you should check out our other episodes. Okay, so Hans, we were talking, you mentioned earlier cost share programs, and you're one of the technical advisors for Farmers for Soil Health.
our cost share program, but I know through, your work, you connect farmers to a variety of different cost share programs, including Farmers for Soil Health. So let's talk a little bit about, right now, the state of the U.S. farm economy. We're trying to encourage and support and promote farmers adopting more regenerative farming practices like no-till and cover crops. How important are cost share programs right now, and where do you see this going, the next 2 to 5 years?
So I still think cost share programs are one of the best ways to get farmers to initially implement a practice, or if they have already implemented it, to tweak the practice, to research different ways of doing things that might have a beneficial outcome for the farm. We've got a fair number of cost share programs still available, including Farmers for Soil Health, but there's also others, and it's important for me when I'm consulting with farmers to know which cost share programs have public funding behind them and which cost share programs have private funding behind them, because we may be able to, with some farmers, stack public and private funding to achieve a better outcome, to where the farmer has relatively little risk going into trying out a new practice like no-till or cover crop.
Yeah, because there's real risk when farmers try out something brand new.
Yes, and if it fails, they will never touch it again the rest of their life.
That's right.
So we've got to have the cost share program to financially offset some of the risk. And we've got to have the technical assistance, somebody that can get them through to the finish line successfully, to ensure that there's a good outcome in order for that practice to continue into the future.
Let's talk about cover crops. I know, as you do, I know a lot of farmers who still not interested in trying cover crops, even with significant cost share opportunities on the table. And I know a lot of farmers who are planting cover crops every year with no cost share program. They see it as that valuable to their operation. So let's talk about this adoption issue. It's really about adoption, getting farmers to try it for not just a year, but for 2 or 3 years. After those first 2 or 3 years, what are you seeing as the keys to keep farmers in the game, so to speak, of using cover crops when perhaps cost share opportunities go away long term?
Well, okay, there's a lot of sociological research into that type of question. But I think what it comes down to is, okay, you've been in a program for 3 years, it's offset the cost of the seed. And you've had beneficial outcomes start to be seen by that year 3. Hopefully even we're getting them out into year 5 or so, where you really start to see changes in soil structure and maybe even some soil sampling results at that point in time, depending on the cover crop or cover crop mixture. But the odds that a problem has popped up, especially going into the year 3 to 5 time frame, whether that might be voles, slugs, or some other perceived negative outcome of the cover crops. It's too wet when you planted because the cover crops hold moisture, that sort of thing. It's those kind of problems that pop up that then may cause that perceived failure and abandonment of the practice. If we can prevent or mitigate those kind of problems, then hopefully by year 3 to 5, the farmer has adapted his identity as a farmer to being one that plants cover crops.
You mentioned one perceived issue with cover crops that I hear farmers in my part of the world talk about a lot, and it's a funny one to me, is slugs. Like all of a sudden, I didn't hear farmers talk about slugs 20 years ago. Now I hear it pretty regularly. What's your experience in that with farmers?
Well, slugs are an interesting phenomenon because they don't become a problem every year for the most part. They aren't really easily controlled when they do pop up.
I've got a salt shaker in my back of my vehicle. We could
Salting the earth may impact yields.
Yeah. You have to admit you've done that as a child.
Yeah. I have to admit that.
Yeah.
And when they do pop up and the cash crop is at the right growth stage, they can cause significant damage. So the mitigation isn't chemical like we would see for a lot of other things. It's cultural. So can we manage the cover crop and the cash crop to where if we would happen to have favorable slug populations or weather for slug populations, we've either got nothing for them to eat out there, or we've got a plant that's so vigorous and past the growth stage where the slugs are going to really be a problem.
Yeah. Well, every new solution oftentimes brings additional challenges.
Absolutely.
And certainly that's the case with cover crops. And it does seem to me, in working with farmers, it is simply a tool that farmers have to figure out how to use. And every farm will be different. Every field will be different. Every year will be different. But as I talk to farmers, seems like once they get past the 3 or 4 year mark, it's when they start kind of getting it figured out and seeing how beneficial it can be to their operations.
I agree with you. Yeah. Each field's as variable as the rain that's fallen on it. Yep.
Well, Hans, we've covered a lot of topics today. We've talked about the weather, not always the most exciting topic, but it was a good one today. And we've talked about, nutrient management and the risk of adopting a new practice in cover crops. And we've even talked about slugs. Any last parting shots you want to give people before we sign off?
I think we've covered a broad enough range of topics that bringing up anything new would be just too much, Ben. It'd be too much.
Well, Hans, it's been a real pleasure having you join the show today. And thanks to everyone for joining this episode of The Grow Down on Soil Health. If this conversation felt like your kind of talk, make sure you rate our podcast, follow us on social media, and check out our website, farmersforsoilhealth.com. Stay tuned for more insights on sustainable farming practices. Until next time.